in terms of the wider inflation story, firstly, it is good news, no doubt about that. Down to 2.2%. A year ago, it was 5.6. You got to remember, in the budget, the Labor Party said that the tax cuts that National put in place was going to drive inflation and lead to increased inflation. That has not happened, and that was...
Yeah, we're just going to pause this here, right? So that has not happened. Here is a report from Chief Economist Paul Conway delivering a speech on inflation. I was going to play, but I'll just read you one paragraph. This is what he says. We've got this thing again. It's well established that interest rates take about 18 months to 2 years to influence inflation. But the influence, there's quite a transmission, sort of channel from interest rate changes to inflation. So if we change the OCR markets, react virtually instantaneously. If we change the OCR markets react virtually instantaneously. And then interest rates get into those kinds of wholesale interest rates, get into retail interest rates eventually. So then consumption and investment at the margins do increase off the back of that. And then 18 months to 2 years later, it gets into inflation. So that process takes time. That'll do. So when the Bush says, tax breaks and, it's been 4 months and we haven't seen it, expect to see it at the end of next year and then the following 6 months after that. When interest rates impact inflation, it'll be then. And what's happening in 2.5 years? 2 years? Another election coming up. So in 18 months to 2 years from now, going into the next election, that is when you will see interest rates being impacted from what this government is doing now. So what he just said there is just straight up horseshit, and we have to call them on it.
Drive inflation and lead to increased inflation. That has not happened, and that was 4 months ago. So that's what they said was going to happen, and it hasn't happened. Instead, inflation's come down back into the band, and we're now seeing the Reserve Bank cutting interest rates really dramatically, which is good news. I think the government can, with respect, claim some credit for this. It is partly the Reserve Bank doing its job, but it's also the government having fiscal discipline. The mistake we saw over the last few years was Grant Robertson spending a lot of money at the same time the Reserve Bank was printing a lot of money, and that drove inflation to record highs. Now what we've got is the Reserve Bank taking demand out of the economy through the OCR, but also the government being careful about its own spending, and the combination of that has allowed inflation to return back into the band and the OCR to start dropping. And it's good news for Kiwi households and businesses.
What a load of rubbish. The fiscal discipline, my foot. They're borrowing for tax cuts. It's like paying the mortgage with a credit card. And the only person that's saying they're not borrowing for tax cuts is them. Everybody else.
This is something that I actually would like this government to be asked. I wrote it down. This will be the question. So, Mr. Bishop, would you need to borrow if you weren't doing tax breaks and interest deductibility for landlords? Because they keep saying, in fact, Nikki Noboats was saying things about, we're not borrowing for tax cuts, we're borrowing for, what was it, day-to-day needs, day-to-day groceries or something, It's like, well, would you have to borrow, though, anything if you weren't doing tax cuts or you weren't doing interest deductibility? And they're not answering that.
OCR to start dropping, and it's good news for Kiwi households and businesses.
What a load of rubbish. The fiscal discipline, my foot. They're borrowing for tax cuts. It's like paying the mortgage with a credit card. And the only person that's saying they're not borrowing for tax cuts is them. Everybody else, every objective observer is saying that it's a dumb thing to do it, and they're doing it. They're borrowing more than it was borrowed under us, except for that COVID year, throughout the whole time. And they say they're the fiscal managers. And also, to turn around and say that pausing the builds of Kaingaroa does not have an impact.
See, when he moves his posture, you know he's winding up. He's winding up when
when you're playing a video game and you lean forward.
Yep,
it's
what he's about to do.
Serious time now.
A serious time from Kieran.
And also, to turn around and say that pausing the builds of Kaingaroa does not have an impact on rent is absolute bollocks. If you're not building houses which people would then move into, what option have they got? They've got the private rental market. And when you don't have enough houses and too many people are competing against themselves for houses, rent goes up. And if you're going to be talking about promises, remember what they said about the tax cut for landlords? Downward pressure on rents, they said. And what happens? Lo and behold, it goes up to a record level.
So I think Kieran might have been watching last night. because, some good vibes going on there. I'm going to do another clip around the Wellington Mayoralty and that whole thing, Chewy, because I've got quite a bit to say about that. But I do love the every you took John Key. I'd have a beer with, who would not have a beer with Kieran McIntyre? What a load of rubbish. It's absolute bollocks. It's just real good Kiwiisms there. I love it. And he speaks, but he speaks eloquently, and he speaks backs it up with knowledge and numbers, but he just sounds like a Kiwi. It's fantastic. Sir.
Why would we take the Bish seriously on this stuff? Like, it's almost alternative economics at this point. Like, it is basic economics that if you want to lower cost, you increase supply. So hitting the, let's be honest, stop button on one of the biggest home building projects that this country has seen since the end of World War II might have an effect on stuff. And it's based on a lie. It is based on the fact that it is uneconomical for Kaingaora to do this, that they're spending all of this money. They are building assets, and this country, this government doesn't understand what a truly transformative asset is. They don't get it with housing. They don't get it with transport. They don't get it with healthcare. They just don't get it. It's as simple as that.